everybody to Spark FX 2021, and this is Fika Entertainment's presentation on the virtual production for stop motion animation, or the making of Scream Street. My name is Peter Divers. I'm the head of visual effects here at Fika Entertainment, and I was also the CG supervisor on this project. Quick little things about Fika Entertainment. Fika Entertainment we offer specialized commercial services to productions looking to implement in-camera visual effects for commercials, television, feature films, and full computer-generated, so CG animation using real-time rendering and performance capture for animated productions, using our in-house virtual production platform, the Alchemy platform. As you can see in front of you, a few different services and things that Fika Entertainment offer. As you can see up there, we are currently based in Australia. We have a studio down in Melbourne, the southern end of Australia, and also a studio up in the Gold Coast, the northern part of Australia.
Why the long face? Oh, I thought you were a big old monster.
Our current studio, as mentioned before, we utilize real-time rendering and performance capture to create efficiencies in productions. We saw a long time ago that there's a lot of crazy new technology out there, and around 2006 we really started to focus on how can we utilize these new technologies to add benefits to different kinds of productions, especially storytellers. Story is obviously always key, and it is how we can wrap this emerging tech, this crazy emerging technology that's out there today, hide that away so storytellers can focus on telling stories. The presentation today is on Scream Street. It'll be presented by myself, Peter Divers. My background is in visual effects and virtual production, which has taken me all around a bunch of places, from New Zealand to London, LA, working on a bunch of different films, all from Hobbitses and Apeses and to more animated, cartoony based stuff as well. Later on, you'll hear from Gavin Williams, our Animation Supervisor, who has been around for, it says here, for over 2 decades doing animation. So he's once again been all around the place as well, working on some absolutely amazing projects.
Fit in, got a wolf living inside under his skin. When he's angry, his body sprouts hair, so he got a ticket. You'll never guess where. Scream, scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream, scream. maybe not. 4,000 years old, but her body would rot. Yeah, being a freak is totally normal when everyone's freaky paranormal. Scream, scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream, scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream, scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream, scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream, street, scream, street. Scream, street, scream, street. Scream, street, scream, street. Scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream, street, scream, street. Scream, scream when you get to Scream Street.
Watch more on BBC iPlayer.
That you just saw was the 90-second snippet that we made, the clip for Coolabi and CBBC over in the UK for the stop motion animation show Scream Street. So a few of the project goals and things we came across. So the actual project itself, I don't know if any of you guys have seen Scream Street, the show, but as I said, it is a stop motion animation. And we were tasked with the challenge of, for this shorter sort of segment around this Halloween dance challenge they wanted to do, they wanted to know, can we speed up some efficiencies? They wanted to find those efficiencies. In stop motion animation, obviously there's time constraints and the practical limitations of it. For this exact clip, as you would have seen, there was over 4 different characters, the use of multiple environments for the original, that we had to mimic from the original show as well. Same sort of deal with the characters. The vampire, the one, Reese is Negative, the character is called, had some quite complex cloth simulations as well we had to deal with, and obviously the werewolf as well had some, crazy modeled in fur and some other technical issues we had to replace. But once again, the main thing there was for the environment character, it's always about matching that show and matching that exact realistic style that we had to go with. Next goal for the show was the dance. Like, it had to be catchy, clear, and concise. This was a dance challenge pushed forward to, kids of the target audience, so they could replicate that dance. And when you're seeing that on, say, a werewolf or some of these other crazier characters, some of those moves can get a bit lost. So that was a real big part from the client, that we needed to make sure that dance had those clear, catchy sort of moves and be repeatable for people. We also had, and the tail end of the project, further social media content that the client wanted us to make. This became, a bunch of 10-second little snippets of some different sorts of dances, some more things like, the Macarena and moonwalks and things like that, which turned out really, really well, but just a bunch more dance stuff that all had to be rendered as well and created. So the exciting part of, I guess, of also why this talk is happening is problems. Obviously, there's a bunch, as there is in any project, and it's how we overcame them. So we had a 5-week deadline for delivery, which included pre-production, character development, and rigging, which is quite tight. To make that tighter, we had 6 staff. So by pre-production, this is everything from, we received reference images from the client, 360 turntables of each asset, and the reference images for the environments. And we had to go through and create all those assets, rig all those assets, including facial, and prepare all cloth simulations for all those assets. Shoot the mocap. We had an external person help us with the dance, obviously. As much as I would like to think, I'm not an amazing dancer. And we also had to shoot all that, clean all that mocap, post-animate it, and render it all. And somewhere in there, figure out the best way to make that look like stop-motion animation. And as stated, that was with 6 staff. So, yes, a very, very tight little turnaround. As mentioned here, production started with no CG assets. So yeah, we created absolutely everything from scratch. The stop motion animation style to be created using performance capture, which I will leave most of that for Gavin Williams to talk about a bit later on. But scale, photorealistic aspects and texture and scale. These were strange assets because while in the show they're supposed to be seen as human-sized assets, but in real life the assets are about a foot tall, about 30 centimeters high. So the properties of the material and the cloth behave like it's a 30 centimeter high character, except cloth doesn't move the same way because it's done through stop motion. So it's not like you're simulating it per frame. So that was a whole set of problems which we'll chat about shortly. And also complex photorealistic miniature environments. These are all 100% photorealistic environments that they do in the show. And as they are, they're practical models. They're just shrunk down. And as you can see, well, you would have been able to see from the clip before, they've got quite a lot of detail in the textures. They're a bit stylized, and it has that nice, real painterly sort of effect. Finally, create an animated dance in stop motion style that will be replicatable by children from home. Obviously, that's an issue. And lastly, which I have a feeling will pop up quite a bit in this Spark Effects week, is COVID. In Australia, we were in heavy lockdown. At that point, for the entire production, it happened, we got put into lockdown probably about a little bit before this project started, but every single one of those 6 staff members are all working from home. And obviously shooting motion capture in a COVID era was also had its own wealth of issues. So we're going to play quickly our making of video, which goes through some of the stuff in a quick little snippet, and then we'll dive into some of these issues. So, as mentioned before, this is a quick little show of our animation pipeline. As stated, the client wanted us really to be able to, how quick can we turn around this sort of stuff? It ended up, this production was part of a larger show that went to broadcast on the BBC, but it also was mostly focused on social media content. Social media content being something that's quite, you need arguably slightly lesser quality than, broadcast TV, feature film stuff, but there's a lot of it. It needs to be done fast and obviously cost effectively. And that's where we come up against this traditional versus Fika process for animation. It's how can we get through to sign off from the client as fast as possible, which for us is on the motion capture stage. So it's how can we visualize all the animation. We have our characters all lined up on the motion capture stage, the CG assets, they're getting in the actual environments, the CG environments we set up, and it's all getting driven live. It's all in real time, and we're recording all this video, which we record out as rushes to send over to the client for them to edit with, for them to create the animation that needs to be made, just like a live action film set. And this way, we can get faster sign off. Final edit happens a lot faster than any other sort of more stagnated linear production. Obviously, sometimes there's still some hits here and there, and we have to go back and potentially do some pickups, like we did on this one. Some of the dance stuff we got missed a bit, and we needed to make sure that it had to. This was in the aim of trying to create a viral video. So yeah, diving back into that. Had to hit the stage again, shoot some more rushes, and once again feed them over to the client for editing. But for us, it's showing the client fully realized assets and fully realized environments with, let's say, 80% of the way their lighting, and they can truly see what they're going to get. It's just a matter of cleaning up those, that motion capture a bit and making that animation look more stylized, and in this case, stop motion. And also fixing up camera moves and things like that. And finally, any cloth simulations or effects that need to be added. Because of this way of working, we can crunch our production times down a lot faster. But as you can see, this big graph on the right side, that 40%, it does mean getting all those assets ready right up front. And on a show like this, when we had one character artist, she modeled up all 4 assets all in ZBrush, and yeah, it was a mighty big effort. So environment creation, as you can see up there, that's a nice little environment. We needed, as is stated, these were complex environments, like you can see from those textures in this slide here. Very hand painted. There's a lot of detail that all need to come across into the production. It all need to come across into the final animated piece. Because of this short turnaround, very early on, we decided that the best way forward was we had some amazing high-res images of the actual miniatures that we created over in for the actual show. So yeah, early on we made the decision to move away from completely 3D modeling everything. We knew that these dance challenge, which had to mimic, they wanted to mimic like a TikTok sort of dance sort of thing, which means much more, locked off front facing sort of cameras. So we didn't need, a crazy 360 spinning around camera and a full thing that a 360 modeled environment would, suit. So, but we did want, a bit of movement. So we went around getting all these environments and breaking them apart into certain aspects. So let's call it like almost like a 2.5D hybrid sort of build out for these environments. So we get the high res ones images. In this instance, you can see how we split them up into certain chunks, into certain texture cards, and stack them in the Unreal Engine, in our renderer of choice for this project. So slowly stack them out. Adding that depth meant that things like depth of field and volumetric fog and stuff like that could take place if we wanted it. It meant we would still get natural shadows, as you can see here, casting on the ground, which was done with a cheeky few little tricks of using some textured planes that are high up in the sky out of view, casting down onto the ground. And obviously for that to occur, we had to have a ground. So that is where we start to step into that more 3D sort of realm, where that ground is actually placed. You can also see a few 3D like pebbles and rocks scattered around the ground. And this is what we kind of ended up with here, with the characters in place to really kind of see how this was kind of working. Once again, pebbles were scattered around mostly to start to hide the seams, and the more 3D elements that we could introduce meant we could start to break that illusion. You'll see a bit more in one of the other environments in a sec. But if we jump forward into here, this is an early look dev of Aoife's motel. Once again, trying to, how could we trick this to seem like a bigger environment? So you can see this main image in the background there with, the main building. That's obviously one, and those 2 side houses are 2 more cards. We built out this front environment here a bit more by adding that little gutter, once again to mimic exactly what it is that's in the show, and those pebbles came back to kind of try to match that. We took this one step further in the show, which I should be able to, only the slight build out to start on this one. The best way to tie this one together was obviously lighting. We needed to find the way that, most of these are just unlit textures, because obviously a 2D card can't be lit. So we went about using emissive textures to see how we could help bring that to light. Bring that to life. Pun not intended, but slightly. I will take the credit for it. The top sign up there, obviously that's an emissive texture once again to kind of add a bit of a glow around it, and any sort of, slight little lens flares or anything we get from that, it's just a nice little addition. And the same sort of thing for all the glass of this building, all just slight little emissive maps to kind of make that pop a bit more. And with a few nicely placed area lights in this scene, you can start to get a bit of a pink glow onto these assets as they're dancing around the scene, which obviously also shares out onto that path. And using these few little tricks and knowing that the camera isn't going to move that much, we managed to pull off these environments quite easily and well. This is the last environment, and something that this is from quite early days on, and this is one of the first tests we did to really see how far we can start to push this camera. And you can see from this angle, you do start to break that illusion. Obviously, it's a flat ground plane with more of our nice little pebbles around, but from this angle, you start to lose that effect that it could work as a 3D element. Once again, from the front on, it's a different situation, and everything starts to come together again. Something that you don't see in this one, yes, you do. That lamp there is something we modeled up. So that's an actual 3D object. As we started to go further and further along into production, it was always that idea that the more 3D objects we could bring into it, the more meant the more realism we could add to it. So we started to model out certain aspects, and these lamps, which are also in the other scene, in the ethers one, the purple one you just saw before, they stretch out quite a bit. Like they've got that nice little pole that sticks out from the actual, it's quite a long way, which could have ended up coming over the top of the characters. So we looked at building that. As once again, we stated that our texture map, our cards in the background, the buildings are unlit. We needed to make sure the shadows were appropriate. And lucky for us, because those lamps were already in the original plates, it was just a matter of matching lighting. And we moved forward that way. So character creation. As stated before, we had 4 high-end CG assets created from reference photos of Scream Street characters. We used ZBrush for sculpting and Substance for all texture generation. ZBrush was absolutely amazing for this. Our Sophie, our character artist, absolutely smashed through these. We started off with Reese. Reese is negative, the vampire-looking dude with his long coat, to really get the shapes down of, the harsher-looking jawlines, and the more stylized kind of look that we were after, and the best way forward on them. Once, as I stated, we took all these into Substance with the idea of how can we maintain a bit of that clay sort of vibe, which comes from the texture of the skin. How can we try to give it that clay sort of vibe again? And using those sort of procedural textures that we have the ability to go with in Substance, we had the ability there to scale textures. If I can show it, we can see a bit here. So this is some of the reference photos we received for Cleo, the mummy. And you can see, especially up top, and those ribbons that are coming out, like these are supposed to be cloth ribbons, and using like a more natural, realistic actual cloth, you have the scale of real world cloth, but on a 30 centimeter character. So that was the sort of thing that we could match very easily with Substance, procedural texturing, and shaders. And obviously you also have the ability with its abundance of other alpha maps and textures and things to paint in all the nice glitzy and grime that wanted. So I'll just run a quick little turntable of her. And that last one was Reese's and his little spin. Obviously that long coat, building once again in those sort of velvety kind of feels for that, all through Substance. I would argue this guy probably gave us the biggest freak out at the beginning. Matching shows where you need to match assets are always the most difficult. Like you can step forward from concept art in quite a few productions and shows, and you start off with your concept art and things will slowly grow and evolve. But when you have to recreate an asset from stop motion, so it's a very realistic asset, and you have to recreate that in not only CG, but in a real-time renderer, you do start to run into issues, and you need to figure out where it is And with a tight timeline, you need to figure out where you want to cut corners. Well, not where you want to, because obviously you don't want to cut any corners. But it always has to happen. You have to meet those sort of deadlines. So what we had with our little Wolfie friend here was all these little bits of fur, these strands. So using alphas in an alpha brush, a fur brush we got in, we put together in ZBrush, we managed to find the biggest clumps. So as you can see around his like elbows there's some big clumps in the hands, and obviously there's a big key features that are sticking out from the top of his head, mimicking those sort of elements. And also there was one or two standoffish ones around his torso there. By hitting those main features, it was how we could grow out this character. This is one of the earlier passes we did. As you can see, this is more of about a placement thing rather than the shape of the fur strands themselves. There's a few that have a bit more shape in there, but it was about finding those key fur clumps and starting to build them out from the beginning. And now to just jump into the mocap animation pipeline. So all we had all the assets realized in the Unreal Engine, all environments, characters, and everything all ready to be driven by the real-time mocap and real-time facial animation on stage for the shoot. All choreography, movement, and rehearsal was all done via Zoom. This is when we're in the middle of COVID lockdown, so we managed, with the current restrictions we had in Melbourne at the time, we were able to get one person, one talent on stage, with our operators keeping a very safe distance from them, and everybody else was accessing the stage via a mixture of Discord or Zoom, or Google Hangouts actually at the time. So we had our animation supervisor, Gavin Williams, who we'll hear from shortly, based up in Queensland. He was accessing the feed through Discord, our internal messaging system here at Fika. So he was able to see, watch back the real-time visualization on the characters that they were doing what we needed them to do, and also just judge the general dance and how that was looking from a different perspective. And at the same time, we were streaming the Google Hangout over to the UK, to Coolabi, where the creators of the show, so they could watch it from their perspective. So making sure the characters are doing what they needed to do, sticking with the signatures, i.e. things like Cleo being a bit more sassy, and the werewolf being behaving the way that he should be behaving. And I am now going to hand this over to Gavin Williams.
Hi, it's Gavin Williams here from Fika Entertainment. I am the Animation Supervisor and are responsible for all aspects of animation and performance capture. My career spans over 20 years, initially starting out in video games, then progressing to feature film visual effects, and are now working in a broadcast environment here at Fika Entertainment. I specialise in performance capture, hand-keyed animation, virtual production, and are driven by bringing CG elements to life in a convincing and emotive way. When Coolabi knocked on our door proposing we do a spin-off dance challenge from their Scream Street franchise, I was immediately intrigued and curious as to how we could pull off such a stunt. I have never in my career worked on a CG project where the framework dictates that it has to look and move exactly like the real-world version of a stop-motion television franchise. Sure, I have spent my time investing in ensuring CG elements represent their real-world counterpart, but this relied on principles and rules unfamiliar to me. On top of that, the COVID-19 pandemic was just starting to get going, so we were having to juggle needs and expectations with ever-increasing limits being placed upon us. Scream Street is a light-hearted and funny children's television show with an exceptionally magical style that appeals to many. The project brief was simple enough: to create a dance that the viewing audience could get behind, learn and share with other like-minded viewers. Coolabi and CBBC greenlit the commencement of a 50-second pitch test to see what we at Fika Entertainment could achieve. This test was not only to see how far we could push a convincing CG stop-motion lookalike, but also whether it was going to be convincing enough for the fans of the show. In order to do that, we studied the show for a considerable amount of time, looking at such aspects as the timing and pacing of the show, cinematography, breakdown of the stop motion, what they did and didn't do, the animated elements, the body, face, hands, and dynamic elements such as hanging chains, the functions of each animated character, and what makes stop motion. So we had to look wider to answer the last question by exploring other techniques and shows. From this initial assessment, we were able to form a plan and set out a robust process to achieve a look and feel that held up to the existing franchise. This test was of the main character, Rhesus, a vampire, doing a thriller-style dance. This taught us a lot about what was possible and also what needed improving upon should the project become greenlit. It also gave us the opportunity to revise the initial framework for emulating a convincing stop-motion spin-off of the Scream Street franchise. One aspect that didn't quite gel was the use of facial capture to drive the performance. This process, although straightforward, didn't present well given the required stop-motion feel that we were trying to achieve. The subtlety and nuances that it provides, although awesome, was not needed here. It was also a chance to test out different frame rates that traditional stop motion has used over the years. Given the luxury of CG, we were able to provide sample rates of 12, 15, 25, and 30 for the client to ponder. Ultimately, their answer didn't affect production and wasn't required until towards the end of delivery. Once the Scream Street dance-off was greenlit, we took our time to break down the scope of the project and what was required to do justice to the franchise. In pre-production, I was particularly interested in the choreography of the dance piece, as that potentially has the biggest problematic knock-on effects from a functional standpoint on each character. Choreography considerations include that the dance was easy for kids to pick up and have fun with. This was the highest priority, as there is no point if kids cannot learn it. Movement, posing, pace and speed. Do the characters hold up to their real-world counterparts? Weight of the performance. Are they moving too quickly compared to their real-world weight? And finally, proportional intersections for characters that have accentuated or enlarged limbs. For instance, large heads and lengthened limbs. So it's important to ensure the dance performance had little to no movement intersection issues near their heads. While the pre-shoot and shoot was in motion, Peter and I then focused our attention onto the rigging and desired functionality of each character, and how far we could push the unlimited possibilities that CG imagery can provide. The characters were all extensively studied from the show. We decided to balance what had come before and what leeway we had to add a little pop, with client approval obviously. It's all very well to add dynamic features to a character, but given the nature of this project, we chose a less is more approach to achieve a stop motion effect. But the most important aspect was emulating their real-world character as close as possible. Our rigging considerations included that the Cleo character, a 2,000-year-old mummy, was a straightforward and pleasant character to work on, but we did have facial considerations to bring out the best in her. Although there was no speech required, that goes for all the characters, she had to convey the correct emotional state at any given time. Also, her hair bandages were given some functionality in order for them to avoid looking too rigid. Luke, a boy that turns into a werewolf, was also a straightforward character to work on, and he too had facial considerations in order to bring out the best in him. For instance, his eyes changed to a black bloodshot effect during the sequence to denote that a metamorphosis to a werewolf was about to happen. He also has a dynamic chain on his hip, so functionality was added there too. The werewolf was on the more technical side, although his facial expressions were fairly straightforward, looking predominantly menacing. He obviously has the dynamic chain and costume of Luke, but also a tail and ears to help out with bringing him to life. Rhesus also has a chain and a different set of facial requirements. For example, his mouth doesn't fully close due to the nature of his vampire fangs. He is also the only character with some dynamic cloth simulation required in his cloak. During post-production, it took some tweaking of the cloth to achieve a dynamic look that looked somewhere between realistic but rigid due to the nature of the real-world version of Rhesus's cloak. Once we entered post-production, the Fika team really came together to execute robust processes and best-in-class solutions to interpret, then represent the performance capture on the day. Our rock-solid retargeting processes achieved a fantastic look from the get-go and achieved the desired nuances that the project's dance performance required. At that point, our primary focus was to add a rock-solid pass on the performance to keep them grounded and balanced. Also, we wanted to ensure the weight is indicative and true to their real-world counterparts. Next up was a pass on the hands, adding to the emotion of the performance, but also balancing the look to give it a stop-motion feel. We didn't want to make the hands look too static like mitts, but we also didn't want them to look too dynamic and expressive either. Scream Street has a funny and happy tone to it, so when it came to the facial pass, we wanted to keep to the spirit of the stop-motion feel, but just as importantly, conveying the emotion that that particular character is trying to show at that moment in time. Excluding the eye tracking, the facial had a stepped feel to it, with plenty of pose holding going on. Given the dynamic movement of the head, I felt it was important to ensure the targeting of the eyes was accurate relative to where they were looking, so they ended up being quite dynamic in movement. Given the minimal facial rig complexity, the facial was considered well executed. The final pass was on any character element that were dynamic. For instance, the chains on the hips had to flow realistically, but not be too distracting. Reese's cloak simulation was dialed in at this point, producing results that were pleasant, in keeping with the show, and not too distracting. Although we added ear controls to the werewolf, we considered that enough action was going on in his performance not to warrant an animation pass on those, so we kept them static. And as for Cleo, those hair bandage strands were given a little bit of life, not too much to be distracting and not too rigid to look too cumbersome and heavy. Framing and cinematography became front and center at that point. The feel by the virtual production EDL was one of a music video insofar as it had multiple cameras capturing footage from different angles and featuring different focal lengths. We then based our final cameras on real-world camera settings. Predominantly, each camera was static with the exception of a few. This is in keeping with the show's cinematic style and one that helped here. Scream Street Dance Challenge, I feel in retrospect, was a fun and engaging project to complete. From an animation perspective, what was left out is just as important as what was put in order to achieve the desired project outcome. Overall, it took a team of a handful of talented staff less than 6 weeks to deliver a dance challenge. There you have it, a quick summary of the animation processes and techniques we used to bring Scream Street's Dance Challenge to life. Thank you very much for listening, and without further ado, I hand the stage back to Peter for a wrap.
Thank you very much, Gavin. And finally, I'm going to wrap up with the last little bits of our pipeline, being lighting and rendering. So as stated, we're running this whole guy in Unreal Engine. Main reasons was speed. At Fika, we use Unreal Engine for almost all of our rendering, for our CG side, and obviously for the in-camera visual effects side. We're very early on adopters of real-time rendering. Some of this stuff, like the animated kid stuff, the more social media stuff, the speed and the quality that you can get out of these engines now is incredible. So for this one, we utilized, it was early-ish days of the new RTX ray trace, and we needed to definitely try to match as many of, we needed the soft shadows. This show was, looking at reference, which we'll jump to in a little bit, had some amazing soft shadows in it that we just really needed to follow and implement as best and as accurately as we could. So we tried as best we could, I guess, to light using master environment lighting. We'd create an individual level for the lighting for each one of our environments, and this meant everything from, as you can see here, this pink sort of glow that we get out from Aoife's little hotel-y cafe here, to give that pink sort of glow. I think this is an early image when we kind of overcranked it a little bit, but to see what we could get as far as we can using in, those sort of environment lights. In the graveyard, you would see that as the glow from the moon, and also the shadows that were on the ground, that we used a lot of shadow sort of casting cards and things. But the main thing here with this lighting and rendering was this is where we really need to make sure we're hitting that stop motion look. At the end of the day, a stop motion show is a show that is taken perfectly with an SLR camera. Each shot is literally an individual photo, and it is photographed to, arguably perfection. You can sit there and really take the time to make sure these are going to look stunning. We need to make sure that we're hitting that photoreal quality out of these little CG guys. So one of the main things we did in this section was we did some tests early on, and we had to completely remove motion blur. That's exactly what, the show obviously does. Using the cinematic cameras and physical cameras within Unreal, we matched that to they shot all the stuff in the UK on a Canon 5D. So we made sure that things like the backplate, the aspect ratio, the film gate, and all that was all set to the same as the Canon 5D, and the 50mm, or 35mm, sorry, lenses and things they use for this sort of show to make sure we're keeping to the correct things. We also got a bunch of f-stop values that they were using. They light their sets quite brightly to make sure that we're hitting the same depth of field as they were tracking over there. On that note, everything obviously in this show, it was all made to scale as well, being the characters of about, as I said, 30 centimeters to a foot sort of high. A few cheats not possible in stop motion that the producer was kind of always wanted. Yeah, early on, chatting with them, and the graveyard was a big one. We wanted to know where can we kind of push it a bit more. And there's some things that would just look nicer, like the graveyard. There's comments early on that like a low-lying fog. Obviously, that's something that can't be achieved in stop motion, from my knowledge, and we did achieve that using a bit of a nicer glows and some nicer fog, which they were happy with to step up the visual quality a bit nicer. And from our benefit, it helped hide some of the 2D cards. We outputted everything as 16-bit renders, always raw PNG, so 4K. Neutral grading was purely so the client had the flexibility. PNGs uncompressed, they went over to them. We did experiment early on with the EXRs to give even more flexibility and go for true 32-bit, but it just wasn't required. There's just it was upping our render times considerably, and the client was very, very happy with the 16-bit ones anyway, so that was fine. And now the big number, the nice happy number. So yeah, 4K uncompressed PNGs, and we're coming in about 45 seconds a frame. Now, obviously, that you could say that is not real time, and it's not, but it's definitely faster than a post renderer. And with the amount of samples we had to increase early days to get our nice soft shadows from, ray tracing and stuff. Yeah, that definitely upped it a bit, but with a great result. So these are a few shots I'm just going to scan through quickly from the actual show. Things that we obviously noticed, like, the shininess of some things. The cloth scale was the big one. You can kind of see that in Reese's negatives, his little vest, his great vest. It's made from true world scale material and, cropped down to a 30-centimeter high guy. And that clay sort of vibe that he has, especially in his hair, you can see those roughness sort of values that are in there. Also, the eyes were a big battle. Oh, maybe battle's not the right term, but the best way to make him move his eyeballs, that's stuck on sort of like a vinyl-y clay sort of thing to give that iris, and how we could best mimic that. This is a good photo to actually see that scale, what I was mentioning in his vest. We use this shot a lot for, this is a bit of a dark one from a different environment, but we use this a lot to help with the depth of field judgment as well. Jumping forward, this is a nice one for a bit more of an overlit environment. What's interesting, you can see the lower eyelids on Reese here, and then back on this one, they're a bit more mushed in there. I think we noticed that early on and decided to go with a bit of a halfway, and the client was very happy with that. So yeah, once again, trying to match that lighting. This one is, you'd still have those soft edges, but this is a bit harsher, obviously, in light-wise. And now jumping into our guys, this was definitely a warmer shot, and now we jumped into him. This is from the actual clip, from the actual show itself that you would have seen before. He's got that nicer, even, more shadowing going on him. Could probably argue that he could have actually upped the bumps a bit, made him look a bit rougher. But Let's just say that was a resolution that this was taken from. So yeah, all three of them. This is where the final comp came together. We provide the three different videos, which are all assembled by the editors over at Coolabi, who did an absolutely amazing job. They're a pleasure to work with, and even their creative team. They were great to work with. So yeah, all three here. As stated earlier, Reese's negative, the vampire guy on the right. We did full cloth sims for that. We did do a few tests with the cloth in Unreal. Weren't really happy with it, so we ended up doing the cloth sims in using Encloth in Maya, and then we would alembic cage them and bring them into Unreal for rendering. We did obviously want to maintain the stop motion. They do all their stuff at 12 FPS, so we did all of our stuff at 12 FPS. All animation was still done at 24 FPS, and then we would actually bring everything into Unreal at 24, and then we'd render out of Unreal at 12 FPS. Main reasons were the cloth sim was a whopper. That's just going to be a nightmare to try to simulate something at 12 FPS. We could have done some more fancier things to export that, but at the end of the day, the pipeline guys, we're all used to working at that sort of FPS, so we stuck with it. And 25 FPS, my mistake. And then output it at that 12 to then create that nice, happy stop motion-y sort of vibe. Some nice lighting. So a lot of this is the blues and greens you can see, and these last few shots is all part of the grade. And once again, you'll see a lot of this is in the actual, not only the environment lights that we place in, but a bit more the actual shot lighting. To make sure we get some nice kicks. The metalwork on Clio, we really want to give that a nice shine, a nice little pop, and also the metalwork that you can see on Reese's Negatives jacket, those little buckles and things. Once again, all substance materials for all that sort of stuff.
Fit in, got a wolf living inside under his skin. When he's angry, his body sprouts hair, so he got a ticket. You'll never guess where. Scream, scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream, scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Next door's a vampire, maybe not. 4,000 years old, but her body would rot. Yeah, being a freak is totally normal when everyone's freaky paranormal. Scream, scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream, scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream, scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream, scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream Street, Scream Street. Scream Street, Scream Street. Scream Street, Scream Street. Scream, scream when you get to Scream Street. Scream Street, Scream Street. Scream, scream when you get to Scream Street.
Watch more on BBC iPlayer.
And that was a video again, just to make sure, now that you know a few things, you might have picked up a few more things. Once again, thank you very, very, very much for being a part of this talk, listening in on it. It's always an honor to be part of these conferences. Fika Entertainment, once again, we have our website, fikaent.com. Feel free to look us up, drop us a line. If anybody has any questions, I'm around on LinkedIn and a bunch of other stuff. I try to reply to everybody if I can. And we are obviously more than happy to work with anybody that wants to step towards the Alchemy system. We're always looking for interesting people to work with, both from a staffing and also job point of view. And yeah, would love to just generally chat with anybody. So yeah, once again, from myself and Gavin Williams, thank you very much for being part of this talk. And enjoy the rest of Spark Effects.